How Hitler was even more evil than you thought, the little-known stories of Hitler's many Jewish friends. Hitler harbored an intense and obsessive hatred of Jews that would define his political career and ultimately lead to the Shoah, the systematic genocide of Jews that resulted in the deaths of more than 6 million Jews. To illustrate just how intense this hatred was, here is a quote from Hitler as early as 1922, 10 years before a plurality of the German electorate would vote for his party, 11 years before him becoming chancellor, and 19 years before the Holocaust began.
Hitler, once I really am in power, my first and foremost task will be the annihilation of the Jews. As soon as I have the power to do so, I will have gallows built in rows, at the Marienplatz in Munich, for example, as many as traffic gallows. Then the Jews will be hanged indiscriminately, and they will remain hanging until they stink. They will hang there as long as the principles of hygiene permit. As soon as they have been and died, the next batch will be strung up, and so on down the line, until the last Jew in Munich has been exterminated. Other cities will follow suit, precisely in this fashion, until all Germany has been completely cleansed of Jews.
And here is an anecdote from Magda Goebbels given right before the end of the war.
You know how I told you at the time quite frankly what the Führer said in the Café Ernest in Munich when he saw the little Jewish boy, you remember? That he would like to squash him flat like a bug on the wall. I couldn't believe it and thought it was just provocative talk. But he really did it later. It was also unspeakably gruesome.
It is true that anti-Semitic attitudes were prevalent in Europe during the 19th and 20th centuries, but to hate Jews with the level of intensity that Hitler did, one would think that some personal experience would have been necessary to trigger it. But not only did Hitler not have any bad experiences with the Jews in his life, but it seems they were particularly kind to him. Dr. Eduard Bloch, Hitler's Jewish physician, is the most famous example. This Jewish doctor treated his mother's cancer to the best of his ability while charging Hitler's then poor family reduced prices, and sometimes did not charge them at all, for top-notch health care. Hitler was so grateful that he granted Dr. Bloch special protection from persecution decades later after annexing Austria. Following the Anschluss, Nazi Germany's annexation of Austria in 1938, Hitler personally intervened to exempt Dr. Bloch from the severe persecution that all of the other 200,000 Austrian Jews were subjected to. The Nazi regime even permitted him to immigrate to the United States and sell his home at market value, which was highly unusual in light of the distressed sales of Jews at the time and the Nazi expropriation of Jewish assets through the Reich flight tax. Moreover, the Blochs were permitted to take out of the country the equivalent of 16 Reichsmark, much higher than the mere 10 Reichsmark limit imposed on other Jews. Hitler even called Dr. Bloch an edel Jude, meaning noble Jew, and said about him,
"If all Jews were like him, there would be no Jewish question."
But believe it or not, Dr. Bloch was far from the only Jew who went out of their way to help Hitler. Another example is Samuel Morgenstern as well as several other Jews in Vienna. Following his rejection from art school, Hitler lived in homeless shelters and made a meager living selling paintings on the streets of Vienna. Hitler's biggest customer and most important source of income during this time was a Jewish businessman named Samuel Morgenstern. In addition to buying Hitler's art regularly, Morgenstern influenced many in his network to do the same. In addition to providing capital to Hitler's struggling art business, Morgenstern used his network to help Hitler make sales he wouldn't have made otherwise. Moreover, according to his database, the majority of people who purchased Hitler's paintings were Jewish. Jewish people were the only way Hitler could even put food on the table. Hitler gave Peter John of the main archive of the NSDAP an appreciative statement in the 1930s that Morgenstern had been his savior during the Vienna period and had given him many important commissions. Unfortunately, Morgenstern did not receive any special protection.